I want to say before I get started on today's talk that song hits me differently all the time. Every time I hear it, it hits me a little bit differently. And currently, we live in a world where believing that song is harder and harder all the time, right? Oneness is a concept that is harder and harder all the time to really understand, integrate, believe, hold to. And I want to take this opportunity for a word from your sponsor to say that if you feel that way, if you've had some of the experiences like I've had in the last couple of weeks, where, let's just say I've been reminded anew that I share this planet with some really wonderful and horrible people, right? On April 30th, 5 Sundays from today, on April 30th, Ryan's going to be out of town. We hate that. But because of that, we're going to have special music here, and I just want you to get yourself prepared for it. I was going to let it be a surprise, but it's a songwriter who's written a song called Jesus Was a Drag Queen. And as soon as I heard it, I invited her to come sing it at our church. And it's a fantastic song if you haven't heard it, by the way. And one of the things we're going to talk about on that day is how we live as spiritual beings in a very, very real world that offers really interesting challenges. All right? So just putting that out there, if you've had the same struggle, if it was easy, we'd all just do it, right? This is the challenge. It's the continuing to grow and ask questions. So I hope that you will come join us. Now let's talk about Jesus. All right. But not the drag queen part. We'll talk about that later. But we are an interfaith community, and so what that means is we honor the wisdom in all great traditions, all great wisdom traditions. We love Jesus, and we love Krishna. We love the Holy Spirit, and we love Buddha, and we love it all. Whatever enlightens our path, whatever helps us understand, whatever aligns us and helps us be centered in that oneness that is universal to all of these great wisdom traditions, in that love that is universal to all of these great philosophies. Whatever it is that helps us understand, we're for that, but it's Jesus season. So we're all Jesus all the time, today and next week, right? And we're going to talk about this story of Jesus. So Easter, which is next week, is the only Christian holiday that is determined by a pretty pagan calculation, right? And so it's always the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, right? So it is like super pagan. And that full moon, by the way, is called the Paschal moon, and Paschal is a word that means of or relating to Easter or the Passover, right? So they call that the Paschal moon. And Easter and the Passover don't always coincide, although they do in the story of Jesus. Remember, the Last Supper was the Passover Seder. That was the Passover meal that he was sharing with the disciples. They don't always coincide with each other because of two things that happened in the 4th century. There was the Council of Nicaea, which was that famous gathering of all the leaders of the Christian church who basically, it was like Build-A-Bear Workshop, but for religion, all right? And so they kind of said, let's kind of create a religion out of all of these ideas. And that's what they did. And they came up with that first Sunday after the full moon rule, right? Also in the 4th century, Jewish scholars standardized the date of Passover. And the Hebrew calendar, like many other calendars other than the one we follow, is a lunar calendar. It's based on the cycles of the moon. And so the Passover is always set on the 15th day of the first month, Nisan, which is a month that begins on the first new moon. Now, like a lot of other cultures, the beginning of the year is spring, not the middle of winter like we do, right? So it's spring is the first of the year. And so that being said, with the new moon and the full moon changing dates every year, Passover switches around. This year, it just so happens to start Wednesday at sundown, April 5th. Goes for 7 days. So it's pretty close. It's kind of confusing, however, but the good news is it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. It's not on the test, right? It's not on the test. So what we did this last year, and I have no juice in this, Crystal. It's like dead as a doornail, so I'm going to have to rely on you, and please, there we go. And what we did last year is that we looked at the 9 days, the last 9 days of Jesus' recorded life, right? So that's the Saturday before Palm Sunday, Sunday of Palm Sunday, today, and then 7 more days leading up to the next Sunday, right? So we're talking 9 days. When we look at the 4 Gospels, the 4 canonized Gospels, a full 34%, and I know that's accurate because I figured it out myself, 34% of all of those Gospels deal with the last 9 days. These last, over a third, right? 1/3. It's interesting how many times the number 3 shows up in the life of Jesus during this time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of these days. Today, this Sunday, we're going to go through the first 6 days. Next Sunday, we're going to go through those last 3 days. They get a little extra time because big stuff happens on those last 3 days, right? So, and then we'll follow up with some questions for each day. So let's go to day 1, Crystal. It is day 1. Now, we know very little about Jesus until the age of 30, right? We know about his birth. We know about when he was 12 and he went to the temple and he didn't leave with his mom and dad and they couldn't find him and all that kind of stuff. That's it. Those are the only 2 stories we know about Jesus before the age of 30. During that time, he worked. He maybe got married. Maybe had some kids. There's a lot of theologians who speculate that he would have. He was probably a normal Jewish carpenter. Chances are he heard a lot about, or at least a little bit, about religions other than Judaism, the religion that he was raised in, right? He may well have heard, by the way, where he lived in the Holy Land was on the western edge of the Silk Road. By the time of Jesus, we already know that the folks in Rome, considerably further west, were already clamoring over Chinese silks. So the Silk Road was passing right through there during the life of Jesus. They would come to basically Damascus or Tyre or one of the cities right in the Holy Land and either turn left and go down to Egypt and give silks to the pharaohs, or they would turn right and go up through Turkey and over around to Rome to give silks to the Roman emperors, right? And so we feel pretty confident, even though some folks have said that Jesus may have gone to India and studied Hinduism during this time. I don't know. I doubt that happened. I doubt it happened because very few people made that trip. If very few people in that day made that trip. And if you did, you were a merchant and you were trying to make money and you were selling something, right? Whether he did or whether he didn't, I don't know. But there's a very good likelihood that he knew about Hinduism because one of the major drivers of religious and social diaspora was the silk trading routes, right? And so he probably heard about Hinduism, the oldest known religion of the major religions. He probably heard about Zoroastrianism, the Indo-Iranian religion out of Iran. He probably knew about Buddhism, Confucianism, Shintoism, Taoism, all of which predate Christianity, right? He may have heard about any of these. He would not have heard of Islam because that was 600 years later. But he would have probably heard of a lot of these other religious traditions. At the age of 30, of course, he goes into the desert, he gets tempted, he goes to John the Baptist, he gets baptized, and he gathers disciples to him, and he starts his ministry. And for 3 years, he goes around Judea talking to people, telling them stories, telling them about the kingdom of heaven. And then he started healing people, and people started paying attention because this was something a little bit more. And he started feeding lots of people with a little basket of food, and he started doing really interesting things. His primary message, we love to say that his primary message was all about love, but if you read closely and you pay really good attention, you look at it, interpret it in good faith, I believe that you find that Jesus' primary message was about inclusion. And of course, I believe there's no inclusion without love, right? To be an inclusive person. But inclusion goes a step farther then. There's a whole lot of people who say, yeah, I can love people from it. I love everybody, but don't make me encounter them, right? Inclusion is the kind of active love, a kind of revolutionary love. That got people's attention, and it got some of the wrong kinds of attention. Things started getting a little tense, and ultimately, Jesus starts predicting his own death. All of this takes place within 3 years. And then the Saturday before Holy Week, we're not exactly certain that this is the date that this happened, but it is the event in the Gospel of John that precedes Holy Week. So a lot of theologians just place this on Saturday. This is what happens. Crystal, we have the raising of Lazarus. Right? So this is, Duccio is an Italian painter from the medieval period, and a lot of our great religious art comes from the medieval period for a couple of reasons. One is the primary customer was the church, or rich people who wanted to get into heaven despite all the horrible things that they'd done. The more things change, the more they anyway. And the other reason is because this is pre-printing press, which means that the average person did not have books, they could not read, they were illiterate, and so the best way to share the stories from the Bible was to paint a picture of them. It's why all the great cathedrals that were built during this era had stained glass windows, because this was the living Bible that people could read all around them, even if they couldn't read, right? And so Jesus is away preaching. Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, they send word to him. Now we have every indication from everything we have that Mary and Martha and Lazarus and Jesus were tight. They were what we might call family of choice today, right? They probably spent Thanksgiving together, I'm pretty sure. No anachronism there. Okay, so they were very tight, and they send word to Jesus, and they say, Jesus, our brother is sick, you must come. Right? They already knew. The people who were close to him knew what he'd been doing. They saw what he'd been doing. They believed that he might have the ability to do amazing things. And what Jesus does is he hesitates, and he says, we'll go in a few days. Now, this is so not like Jesus because he loves Lazarus. He loves Mary and Martha. Why would he wait just a few days? I'm thinking Jesus is already knowing what's coming. The timing of Holy Week is impeccable. If you know anything about the structure of story, the timing of Holy Week is impeccable. Jesus knows what's getting ready to happen. He knows how things are going to play out. He knows how they need to unfold. And he says, wait. We're going to wait. To the disciples, that must have looked like a mistake, right? To Mary and Martha, it certainly looked like a mistake. But Jesus said, let's wait. And he waits for 2 days. Now, 2, symbolically, is the number of harmony and balance and love. And so, symbolically, Jesus is waiting until things are in balance, until things are where they want him to be. And then finally he says, our brother Lazarus has gone to sleep. We're going to go wake him up. That's what he says to the disciples. So they go to Bethany where Lazarus lives, and when they get there, Mary and Martha meet him, and lots of people are hanging around there already mourning Lazarus, and they say, you're too late. Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. Now 4 is the number of completion, right? The completed square. Notice how we're dancing around the number 3, right? Jesus is kind of dancing around this number 3. Some people start saying, you know what, Mary and Martha are just mourning. Oh, he's dead, he's gone. Some people start saying, if you'd just been here, Jesus. And Jesus gets angry. That's the word they use in the scriptures. Jesus gets angry. And one of the things we see in these last 9 days is we see Jesus experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion. I think this is an important thing for us as spiritual people to know, because we like to love and light the world to death. Right? We're just going to sit here and love and light and hold everybody in wholeness and all this kind of stuff. We have very good company when we get angry. We're in very good company. Gandhi got angry. Martin Luther King got angry. Jesus got angry, right? And I can imagine him going over to the disciples going, these people don't appreciate a thing I do. Right? I show up and now they're bitching at me, right? And so he gets angry, and then he goes to the tomb. And he begins to cry. It's where we have the shortest verse in the Bible, right? Jesus wept. It's so short that people like to just kind of skip over it, right? I know when I was a kid growing up in church, you're like, oh, Jesus wept. Okay, great. Remember that for the Bible trivia, because it's the shortest verse in the Bible. But I think Jesus wept. I think he might have fallen to his knees. I think he might have been unable to control himself, felt his shoulders heaving. His brother is gone, right? And while he's weeping, he hears some folks behind him saying, look how much Jesus loved Lazarus. But he also hears some other voices saying, I don't know what he's crying for if he had just been here. And he gets angry again. His weeping is sandwiched between two instances of anger, right? What is he angry about? Is he mad that the people don't have faith? Is he mad at himself for not coming earlier? Is he mad that they're not just buying everything? I don't know. He's mad. But it's in that anger that he takes action. It's from the anger place that he stands up and he says, roll that stone away. And then he commands Lazarus to arise and come forth. And he does. Now, in literature, we call this foreshadowing. This is really big foreshadowing. And so the ancient world had a lot of instances of death and resurrection. Most of the ancient gods had some kind of death and resurrection story. This was not a new, Jesus didn't make this story up, right? This story has been around in the ancient psyche for a very long time. It was considered one of the most sacred and godlike experiences one could have. If that doesn't prove God, what would? That something dead has come back to life again. So after he raises Lazarus, some folks believe him, but some folks see this as a problem. Okay, it's fine when you're feeding 5,000 people. It's fine when you're healing a few people. That could be some kind of parlor trick. We don't know. But you just raised a dude from the dead, and we're concerned about this. And the scriptures tell us from that point on, they plotted to kill him. Right? So, next slide, please. I want to give you a little bit of a lay of the land. Map of Palestine. Where we're talking about here. You can see that we have a couple of major districts there. One is Galilee up at the top, Jesus of Galilee. There's Nazareth right in the middle, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Nazarene, right? There's Samaria, where the Good Samaritan lived. And then down below that is Judea, where we find Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Jericho. And just to put it all, and connecting those two seas, of course, is the Jordan River. This is the entirety of the world that we knew Jesus to have lived in. Just to give you some perspective, from Nazareth to Jerusalem is about 65 miles as the crow flies. If you go online right now and try to find out how far it is, they'll give you a longer distance because they have to take a highway. But Jesus got to walk at pretty much a direct route for the most part. And by the way, that road going from Nazareth north and south along the eastern side of the Mediterranean, that was the major road for the end of the Silk trade route, where they would go one way or the other, right? So in this next slide is a map of close-up of Judea, and I want to give you some perspective here because Bethany over there on the right is where Lazarus lived. There's a town that in Sumner County we'd call Bethpage, but it's what's called Bethphage, right? It's on the road to Jerusalem. That Mount of Olives is a little bit north. It's actually south a little bit. The road would go from Bethany through Bethphage, around the Mount of Olives, through the Garden of Gethsemane, and you would enter the walled city of Jerusalem. Right? Bethany to Jerusalem is just under 2 miles. All of what you see right now is encompassed in the modern city of Jerusalem. So our day one questions, Crystal. Number one, day one questions. Is there anything I've written off as past the point of no return that the divine in me is asking me to resurrect? There's 4 questions, by the way, for each one. So if you want to take a picture with your phone, you might want to hold off. Number 2, what is buried in my subconscious or core beliefs that needs the stone rolled away? Maybe from an angry command of mine. I don't know if you have ever had to do this. I've had to do it. I've had to look in the mirror and go, you're going to get beyond this. We're done with this, right? We're done believing this. Next question. Would I leave what I know if the sacred within me, the divine within me said, arise and come out? We've got something else to do. There's more to do. And 4th, am I listening to too many voices? Jesus is hearing all these voices, and this is where he gets angry. I don't know how much anger you stew in these days, but sometimes, is it not from listening to too many voices? In the age of social media, do you think it might be possible that we sometimes listen to too many voices? Could be possible. Moving on to day 2. Day 2, it's Sunday, it's Palm Sunday. Jesus is going to enter Jerusalem. He's going to travel that less than 2 miles from Bethany into Jerusalem. It's the first day of Passover week. This is a big, huge Jewish holiday. Passover is a holiday that arose out of the time when the Hebrew children were enslaved in Egypt. The Hebrews, all of them, adults and the children. The Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt. The angel of death was going to come through and kill all the firstborn male children in Egypt. And so the angel of death, God instructs the Hebrews to go and kill a sacrificial lamb and smear the lamb's blood at the top of the door, and the angel of death will know to pass over your door. So literally, people were saved by the blood of the lamb, right? It's the same exact week that Jesus is going to be crucified. And if you grew up in a Christian or Protestant tradition like I did, then you heard saved by the blood of the lamb a million times. And that's where this symbolism all ties together. Jesus is going to pass through Bethphage, and Bethphage is a place, he tells the disciples, you're going to go up to this house, you're going to see a donkey, you're going to see a colt, tell them we need their donkey. He tells them precisely where to find it. Now this is the place where, not yet, sorry, I know I did that. This is so, I'm going to need you to mind meld with me just a little bit. Bethphage is a place where the chief priest of the temple keep their sacrificial lambs and goats, right? This is an era wherein that's part of what you did at the temple was you sacrificed. And so all of the sacrificial lambs and goats were kept in this little town that Jesus was going to pass right through. And then, now, Jesus is going to enter on a donkey. And if you grew up like I did, this was the image that you saw. Very peaceful, very happy, everybody loves everybody, and we're waving palm branches around. And we're going to put some palm branches down. Now, Jesus enters through the eastern gate. All of these ancient towns were walled cities. When I was in India recently, we go into Old Jaipur, which is the old walled city. We go into Old Delhi, which is the old, and we literally enter through gates just like that. Now you can drive a car, maybe one car through there, through some of them. But all of these cities would have had several gates around them. Jesus enters through the eastern gates called the Golden Gate. He enters on the back of a donkey. Now, the theologian Marcus Borg has theorized that Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, right, under the Emperor Tiberius Augustus Caesar, that Pilate would enter on the first day of Passover week as well. But he would enter through the western gate on the back of a horse, with his security detail around him, right? The east is symbolic of birth and awakening and new life. It is the direction of peace, and the donkey is symbolic of peace. The west is symbolic of death, the end, war, and the horse is a symbol of war. So Jesus enters through the peaceful gate on the peaceful donkey, bringing a new day. Pontius Pilate enters through the gate of war on a war horse, right? People meet Jesus, they put palms down. Palms are symbolic of victory and triumph and peace and eternal life. They're paving the road of victory for Jesus. Now, all of the Jewish leaders were already very suspicious of Jesus. It's important for us to realize, because we like to look at anything historical as very clear-cut. Right? Oh, we had World War II, and the Americans were the good guys who went and defeated the Nazis. And the more we know, the more we know that may not always have been true, right? In that same kind of way, when I was a kid, I was told that, isn't this interesting? I remember very clearly being taught, maybe in Sunday school or from my father or something, isn't it interesting how quick people can change? They're celebrating you in 1 week, and a week later, they're crucifying you. But here's an important, that is true. That's a good lesson to learn, but I think another important piece of that is all the same people are around all the time. While he's walking in one gate being celebrated, the people who are plotting to kill him are already there. They're already suspicious. They're already not sure about this. Jesus knows this. I see this entrance on Palm Sunday not as this celebratory entrance into a festival. I see it as a march on Washington. Jesus is coming. He knows what's going to happen, and he's willing to speak truth to power. This wasn't a parade. It was a protest, right? This is a story of opposing forces. As much as that makes us uncomfortable sometimes, and we want everything to be love and light, this is a story of opposing forces. The Roman Empire went all the way to Great Britain during this time, most of the Mediterranean world. It was a huge empire. And the Roman strategy was to pretty much leave the Jews in Jerusalem alone. It's an ancient religion. As long as they don't cause any problems, we're just going to leave them alone and let them be. Pontius, just keep them in line. Let them not be a trouble. So the high priest of the temple had become very comfortable with the Roman governors, right? The leaders of the church had become very, very friendly with the leaders of the government. I know you find that hard to believe, but it can happen, right? The religious leaders had become part of the system. They were part of the 1%, and Jesus was marching into Jerusalem to speak truth to power. Now, on this next slide here, I do want to make it a point of pointing out that the Jesus I grew up with, was white Jesus on the left. And I do find it ethically my responsibility to point out to you that there were no white people in the Bible, right? And so Jesus was a Middle Eastern, brown-skinned, with hair like lamb's wool, right? He was, and I think more harm than we can possibly imagine has been done by the misrepresentation of this religious figure, right? So although about the only pictures you can find of Jesus are of white Jesus, I want to specifically let you know that the guy on the right is who I picture. Here are the Golden Gate questions, entering through the Eastern Golden Gate. Number 1, am I willing to face what I know is mine to do? This week, there was going to be a march in East Nashville for the transgender community, and it got canceled. I don't know why. It may have been the weather. It may have been the fact that there were so many other marches going on. It may have been the situation with the Covenant school shooting. It may have been all kinds of things. But I also know this, through people I know and buzz that I was hearing on social media, there were people telling their transgender friends, please don't go. Please stay home right now. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous for you to be there. Let me tell you, it takes courage. It takes courage to sit at a lunch counter when people tell you you're not supposed to be there. It takes courage to march across a bridge, to vote when people tell you you can't do this. It takes courage to go to a protest. Am I willing to face what is mine to do? First off, when you're afraid and you need to stay home, that's okay. We'll march for you. Right? Someone will march for you. But sometimes, I've had to do it. Some of you might have had to do it as well. There have been times when I've been a little nervous about showing up at Pride. Or I've been a little nervous about showing up for this message we want to send to the state legislature. Am I willing to face what I know is mine to do? That's a harder question than it looks like on the surface. Next question. Am I entering through gates of peace or gates of conflict? Hear me clearly. You may face conflict regardless of which gate you enter. This is not a guarantee that you won't face conflict, but it's about where you set your heart from the beginning. Right? Question 3, do I recognize the signs and synchronicities in my life and work with them rather than against them? It's not a matter of avoiding bad things in my life. It's a matter of recognizing this is the flow that I'm in. Jesus saw the signs. He knew the prophecies. He knew what was waiting, and he didn't really want to do it. We have clear evidence that he didn't want to do that, but he did it anyway. Next question. Do I accept the palm branches that people lay down for me? Sometimes, you know what? We all have friends. No matter how contentious a time is, we all have friends. Somebody is there to advocate for you. Somebody is there to lay down those palm branches. Day 3, Monday. There was a party Sunday. It was the first day of Passover week. Everybody's entering Jerusalem. Jesus returned to Bethany on Sunday night. He probably spent the night with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. The next morning, Jesus is hungry, maybe even I don't know, hungover. I can't say. He could be. And we know he's a little hangry, right? He was already angry on Saturday. Now he's hangry. He sees a fig tree in the distance. He's walking. They're going to go back into Jerusalem. He sees a fig tree in the distance. He walks over to it because he's hungry. When he gets there, he finds that there's nothing there because, as Mark 11:13 tells us, it was not the season for figs. And there's a whole other talk. There's a whole other talk in that, looking for fruit out of season. So that might be a topic that we talk about later. But Jesus gets mad. He doesn't care that the fruit is out of season. He gets mad because he's angry and he's hungry, and he curses the fig tree. And later that day, they're going to walk by it again, and the fig tree's all shriveled up, right? Which really kind of doesn't bode well for being hungry during fig season. But at any rate, he gets to Jerusalem. He's hangry. And this is what happens when he gets to Jerusalem. Yeah, he's really upset. And he clears the temple. It's the cleansing of the temple. He goes to the temple and he sees sellers and moneylenders and loan sharks and bookies and lobbyists and all kinds of other people. And Jesus has a lot of anger this week. He's been preaching love and people aren't getting it. And he gets ticked off. My Father's house is a house of prayer, not a den of thieves. It's not a house of trade. And in the book of John, it says that he made a scourge out of small cords. He made a whip. He didn't just get angry and flip tables. He made a whip and went after people. He's not playing. And when he gets done, he says, now there's room for the lame and the blind to come in. Now there's room for the people seeking healing to come in. So, temple cleansing questions. Number 1. Am I clear about what violates my spirit? We could just end right there. It'd be am I clear about what violates my spirit? Number 2, what causes me to feel righteous anger? It's okay to feel righteous anger. What is it that causes me to feel it? Number 3, what have I allowed to take up space in the temple of my spirit? There's a sacred place within you that is every bit as holy as the place Jesus walked into that day. And sometimes we clutter it with our thoughts of what's going on in the material world. Number 4, do I suppress my natural reaction to spiritual violation? Sometimes we do, especially as spiritual people, because a lot of us who've been on a journey, especially a unity journey or a metaphysical journey, is that we've learned how to spiritually bypass. We've learned to throw some toxic positivity in there to avoid acknowledging that which violates our spirit. And we need to be able to see it clearly, right? That is a violation of my spirit. Day 4, Tuesday, Taco Tuesday. I got that from Carolyn last year, but I was so mad that she thought of it and I didn't. But she's not here today, so yeah, I thought of that. So Jesus has raised a man from the dead. He's been godlike. He's been divine. He marched on Washington, coming to speak truth to the political system. He cleared the temple, coming to speak truth to the religious system. He's ticked all kinds of people off, and it's just Tuesday, right? Disciples probably wanted to lay low on Tuesday. Like, things are getting hot in here. Jesus instead says, nope, we're going to go do some teaching. And in fact, some of his most profound teaching happens on that day. So many parables that Jesus taught come from that day. And he gets questioned by the high priest. There they are. They want to trick him. If they can get him to speak against church law or civic law, they can whisk him away and make him disappear. Right? If we can just get you to cross the line, boom, we can take care of you. Jesus is ready for it. He doesn't try to avoid it. He turns it around on them, in fact. In many ways, he's like saying, I'm not in your courtroom, you're in mine. Right? To be so certain of your position that you can't be tricked. What a beautiful place to be in. The high priest, he answers them, turns them away. Then come the Pharisees, he answers them, he turns them away. And then come the Sadducees, he answers them, turns them away. The Pharisees come back all day long. It's this. So Pharisees and Sadducees, there's a difference. They're both Jewish sects. People, right? So the Pharisees, the Sadducees are like the fundamentalists. They believe in the temple. They believe in the Torah alone. They are fundamentalist Torah believers. They are the upper class, right? The Pharisees believe in the law, the interpretations of the Torah. They're very middle class. They're like, hey, let's make this work for everybody. Notice that The Sadducees did not believe in a resurrection or an afterlife, which always makes me wonder why you went to temple at all, quite frankly. I mean, that's a perfectly good day to go to the beach, in my opinion. But at any rate, so this is the difference between them. These two groups, they don't like each other. But we know the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Or as Brene Brown says, there's a common enemy intimacy that springs up when people have the same enemy. So he's teaching all day long. Here are the questions for this day. Or no, let me start right here. No, you're good. See, this is what happens when I don't have something in my hand. What is the most important commandment? This is the most important teaching that happens that day. Someone says to him, what's the most important commandment? They want to trick him up. And he says to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And he said all of Jewish law hinges on these two things, these two ideas right here. You're trying to trick me, and this is where it all comes back to. This is everything. So the inner Pharisee questions. How many times have we been a Pharisee to ourselves? The inner Pharisee question, what within me is ruled by legalism? Number 2, what is it that creates obstacles to loving the divine or loving my neighbor as myself? I'm going to do a talk in a few weeks on that idea of who is my neighbor. That's going to be a part of the oneness talk. Who is my neighbor? Remember the Good Samaritan? The neighbor, we often think, is anyone we encounter. But the story of the Good Samaritan tells us very clearly that your neighbor is the one who comes to you in mercy and kindness, who agrees with you from the beginning that we're going to be neighbors. I'll talk about that more in a couple of weeks. Number 3, am I able to separate the teacher from the truth? I had to do a lot of that over the last several years. I had to remember that certain teachers that maybe I've lost some respect for still said some really profound things. And some things that came out of people's mouths I respect, I have to question a little bit. So we have to be able to separate that a little bit. And the 4th one, am I able to speak truth to power even when the power is my own ego? Because that's who the Pharisees and the Sadducees represent, the ego mind. Day 5. Day 5 is called Spy Wednesday, right? Spy Wednesday and Holy Week. 2 important things happen on Spy Wednesday. Jesus is eating at the house of a friend, Simon the leper, in Bethany. And this woman comes in. We think it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus. She comes in, and she begins to anoint his feet with very expensive perfume, which probably came from that Silk Road, that came from the east. And she anoints Jesus' feet. Jesus equates this to being anointed for burial. Now, some of the disciples get ticked off. Remember, Judas is the treasurer, and he sees everything through the lens of money. How much is this going to cost? That could have been sold. We could have fed so many poor people if we had just sold that. And Jesus stops them and says, you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Well, Judas thinks that's the most arrogant thing he's ever heard in his life. And he gets ticked off, and he leaves. And next slide is when we have the bargain of Judas. That day, that Wednesday, Spy Wednesday, Judas leaves and he goes and makes his bargain. He meets with the chief priest of the temple and he agrees that he's going to turn Jesus over for 30 pieces of silver because he's had it. He can't take this guy anymore. The bargain questions. Number 1, have I anointed the feet of the Christ within me? Do I consider it sacred? Do I consider it holy? Do I do self-care first before going and taking care of others? Number 2, what am I seeing in tunnel vision that could benefit from a broader view? Because Judas is certainly seeing in tunnel vision. This is about the money, right? I can't open myself up to what Jesus may be understanding. Number 3, what have I sold too cheaply? Judas sells Jesus of Nazareth for 30 pieces of silver. Something that much of the world believes is very divine and sacred, right? What divine and sacred part of my life have I reduced to a cost-benefit analysis? Number 4, when do I see myself aligning with my soul's enemy? We spiritual people don't like that idea of enemy. We're all one, but this is a story of opposing forces. Do I stay in my truth regardless of what I'm faced with? Day 6, Maundy Thursday. We're going to begin day 6, and then we'll finish it next week. We're going to get through part of it. They prepare to meet and have the Passover supper, the Last Supper. We have the Last Supper here. This is Da Vinci's Last Supper. We have the disciples in groups of... This is a masterpiece. If you ever hear an art historian talk about this, they'll talk about this picture for hours. There's 3 windows. The disciples are in groups of 3. There's a lintel that's like a halo behind the head of Jesus. Jesus' head is what the art world would call the vanishing point. Everything points to the head of Jesus. Jesus is reaching with 2 arms like a triangle, like a trinity. He's got one hand up and the other hand down. He's giving and he's receiving. The 3 to his right, our left, are John the Beloved, speculated by some to be Mary Magdalene, actually, Peter, and Judas. Judas is clutching a bag of money in his right hand. And with the other, he's reaching forward to steal John's roll. Both Jesus and Judas, they're the only 2 who have a hand reaching out for something. They're both reaching in the same direction. Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, told us that he saw the bread as substance and the wine as energy. If that's true, Judas is reaching for the bread, the substance, the material world. Jesus is reaching for the wine, the energy, the spiritual world. Jesus also that night predicts Peter's betrayal. I saw a meme yesterday. I wish I had put it in here. I saw someone had I think they tweeted, on the night of Jesus' arrest, Peter was willing to kill for Christ, but not willing to die for him. Remember, he denied him before the sun came up. But he's the one who cut off a soldier's ear when they came to get Jesus in the garden. Right? There's a whole type of counterfeit faithfulness behind being willing to kill for something that you're not willing to die for. That's another talk. Gosh, I'll have to give that one later. Jesus leaves the supper and he goes to pray in the garden. He goes to pray. White Jesus is praying in the garden. We don't know what the real Jesus was doing, but he goes to the garden. This is when he can't keep his disciples awake. 3 times he asked them to stay awake with him. In all of his prayers, he asked, if there's any way, please let this cup pass from me. I don't want to do this. If there's any way. And ultimately, he always comes back to, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the point, right? So the Last Supper questions that we have here, our last 4 questions today. Have I sat down to eat with that which opposes me? Might seem politically expedient at times, but when you're sitting down to sacred supper, sit down with that which aligns with your soul. Number 2, have I released that which opposes me to go do as it will? I don't know about you, but some of the people who are angry in the world today, I would love to be able to control them. I would love to be able to make racists stop being racist. I would love to be able to make homophobes stop being homophobic. I would love to make misogynists stop being misogynistic. And sometimes you have to release that to go do as it will. I can stand up against you, that's another talk, but I'm going to release you to do as it will. The next question, have I been willing to kill but not die? Have I been willing to blurt out on others what I believe the intent is, but unwilling to surrender completely within myself? Number 4, have I prayed and then completely let go? Brought my appeal to the divine and then let go. Those are the first 6 days. So next Sunday, Easter Sunday, is when we'll look at the last 3 days. We'll continue the journey. When there are opposing forces, can peace really triumph? Is that long moral arc of the universe actually bending toward justice? I'm going to answer that question for you next week. Not really. We're going to try. Namaste.